There is a unique and haunting category of crime that occupies a special place in the landscape of criminal justice. It is the murder case without a body. It is a crime that defies the most fundamental expectation of homicide: the presence of the deceased. To secure a conviction in such a case requires a mountain of evidence so high, so compelling, that it creates a certainty that overwhelms the profound uncertainty of a missing victim. It forces a jury to make a logical leap of faith, to declare a person murdered when they are, officially, only missing. This is the story of one such case, a story that unfolded in the ancient rolling hills of North Yorkshire in England. It's a story of a vibrant young woman on the cusp of adulthood, a secret, forbidden love affair with a much older married man, and a digital ghost trail that would speak for the victim when she could no longer speak for herself. This is the terrifying story of the disappearance and murder of Jenny Nicholl. Jenny was a splash of vibrant color against the serene green and gray backdrop of her hometown. She was, by every account, a daughter any parent would be proud of. With a bright, infectious smile and a laugh that could fill a room, she was full of the boundless energy and optimistic dreams of a typical teenager. She loved music, she loved her friends, and she was fiercely loyal to her family. She had just finished a course in travel and tourism and was excited about the future, about seeing the world beyond the familiar hills of the Dales. She was a hard worker, holding down a job at a local grocery store, the kind of cheerful, friendly face that regular customers looked forward to seeing. To her parents, she was their world, their only child. They had a close, loving relationship. Jenny was in that transitional phase of life, not quite a girl but not yet a woman, still living under her parents' protective roof, but beginning to forge her own path, make her own choices, and, as they would tragically discover, keep her own secrets. The last week of June 2005 started out as an adventure for Jenny. She had told her parents she was going on a camping trip to the Lake District, another famously beautiful region of England, with some friends. It was a perfectly normal, believable plan for a 19-year-old in the middle of summer. She packed her bags, said her goodbyes, and set off on her trip. Her parents, Anne and Brian, thought nothing of it. They trusted their daughter. When she returned home on the evening of Thursday, June 30th, she seemed happy and full of stories from her trip. She was tired, as one would be after a few days of camping, and after a brief chat with her parents, she went up to her bedroom for the night. That was the last time they would ever see her. The next morning, Friday, July the 1st, Anne Nicholl went to wake her daughter. But Jenny's room was empty. Her bed hadn't been slept in. This was unusual, but not immediately cause for panic. Anne assumed Jenny might have gotten up early and gone to a friend's house. But as the morning wore on, a small gnawing seed of worry began to sprout. Anne tried calling Jenny's cell phone. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. She sent a text message. There was no reply. She started calling Jenny's friends, but no one had seen her or heard from her. Throughout the day, Brian and Anne's calls to their daughter's phone became more and more frequent, more and more desperate. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. By the weekend, the gnawing worry had grown into a full-blown, terrifying panic. Their daughter, their reliable, responsible Jenny, had vanished. On Sunday, with still no word, they did what any terrified parent would do. They called the police and reported Jenny Nicholl missing. The North Yorkshire police initially treated it as a standard missing person case involving a young adult. The prevailing theory was that she had likely run off with a new boyfriend or decided to take an impromptu trip without telling her parents. But Brian and Anne Nicholl knew their daughter. This was not in her character. She would never have put them through this kind of worry. They insisted that something was terribly wrong. The police began their investigation, and one of the first clues they found only deepened the mystery. Jenny's small silver Peugeot 106 was found abandoned on Monday, July 4th. It was parked at the Holly Hill Inn, a remote pub on the side of a lonely road near the town of Richmond. The location was odd, isolated. The car was locked, and inside, police found Jenny's purse, her wallet, and her keys. Everything a person would need was there, except for Jenny herself and her cell phone. The discovery of the car was a chilling development. A person doesn't just abandon their car with their wallet inside in the middle of nowhere. The theory that she had run away was now looking increasingly unlikely. This was beginning to look less like a case of a rebellious teenager and more like something sinister. Detectives began to dig into Jenny's life, trying to build a picture of who she was and what might have happened to her. They interviewed her circle of friends, and it was here that the carefully constructed image of a typical, happy-go-lucky teenager began to fracture, revealing a secret, more complicated life that she had hidden from her parents. Jenny, they learned, had been involved in a secret love affair, and her secret lover was not a boy her own age. He was a 47-year-old man named David Hodgson. The name sent a jolt through the investigation. David Hodgson was not some stranger. He was a well-known figure in the small community, a married man with children, a man more than twice Jenny's age. He was a butcher by trade, a man who, on the surface, presented a veneer of working-class respectability. He was a friend of the Nicholl family. In fact, Brian Nicholl had known him for years. They were acquaintances, the kind of men who would nod and say hello in the street. The idea that this man, this contemporary of her father, was having a secret sexual relationship with their 19-year-old daughter was a horrifying revelation for Brian and Anne. It was a betrayal of a profound and sickening order. The police immediately brought David Hodgson in for questioning. He presented himself as a concerned family friend, shocked and saddened by Jenny's disappearance. He admitted that he knew Jenny, of course, but he vehemently denied any kind of romantic or sexual relationship. He claimed they were just friends, that he was a sort of father figure to her, someone she could talk to. He was calm, cooperative, and plausible. But the detectives were skeptical. Jenny's friends were adamant about the affair. They told police that the relationship had been going on for some time. They said Jenny had been in love with Hodgson, but that the relationship was also a source of great turmoil for her. She was torn apart by the secrecy, the lies, and the guilt. Her friends said that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Jenny had decided to end the affair. She had given Hodgson an ultimatum: leave his wife and be with her properly, or the relationship was over. This was the turning point. This was the motive. The detectives began to form a theory. David Hodgson was a man living a double life. He had a wife, a family, a reputation to maintain. He was also engaged in a dangerous, illicit affair with a teenage girl. As long as Jenny was willing to be his secret, he could have the best of both worlds. But when she threatened to end the relationship, or worse, to expose it, she was no longer a secret lover. She was a threat. She was a liability that could destroy his life, his marriage, his standing in the community. Rejection, for a man with a fragile ego and a life built on deceit, can be a powerful catalyst for violence. Suddenly, David Hodgson was no longer just a person of interest. He was the prime suspect in Jenny Nicholl's disappearance and potential murder. With no body, the police knew that a traditional murder investigation was impossible. They couldn't rely on forensic evidence from a crime scene because they had no crime scene. They couldn't rely on a murder weapon because they had no weapon. They had to build their case on a different kind of evidence. They had to follow the ghost in the machine. They had to reconstruct Jenny's final hours through the digital trail she and her killer had left behind on their cell phones. The North Yorkshire Police brought in forensic telecommunications experts to conduct a painstaking analysis of the call and text message records from both Jenny's and David Hodgson's phones. What they uncovered was a silent digital conversation that told a story of obsession, control, and murder. The first crucial discovery was about the camping trip. Jenny hadn't gone to the Lake District with her friends at all. That was a lie, a cover story. Phone records showed that she had spent that entire week with David Hodgson. They had stayed at a remote cottage in the Scottish borders, a secret getaway. This discovery proved the intensity of their relationship and the extent of the lies they were both telling. The phone records for the day of Jenny's disappearance, Thursday, June 30th, were the key. The data showed a flurry of calls and texts between Jenny and Hodgson throughout the day as they were driving back from Scotland. Then, at around 5 p.m., just after Jenny had arrived home and spoken to her parents for the last time, the digital trail took a sinister turn. Cell site analysis, a technology that can pinpoint the location of a phone by measuring which cell tower it connects to, allowed the police to track the movements of both phones. They could see Jenny's phone at her home in Richmond. At the same time, they could see David Hodgson's phone leaving his home in a nearby village and traveling towards Richmond. Then, both phones began moving together, away from Jenny's house. The silent data was screaming what had happened. Hodgson had picked Jenny up from her home. They were together. For the next few hours, the two phones traveled in tandem, their signals hitting the same cell towers, a digital dance of a predator and his prey. They drove to a secluded spot, a place where they were unlikely to be seen. And it was there, police believe, that the final fatal confrontation took place. The phone records then showed the most chilling part of the timeline. After a period of activity, Jenny's phone suddenly went silent. No more outgoing calls, no more texts, but it was still on, and it began to move again. But this time, it was moving alone. David Hodgson's phone had been turned off, a common tactic for someone trying to hide their location. But Jenny's phone, still powered on, began a journey. The cell site analysis showed it traveling from the secluded spot through the countryside and heading directly towards David Hodgson's home village of Sandhutton. The signal from her phone was last picked up by a cell tower that covered his house and the surrounding area. And then, at 12:09 a.m. on the morning of July 1st, Jenny's phone was used one last time. A final cryptic text message was sent from her phone to a man she had recently started dating, a boy her own age. The message was strange, out of character. It said, "Don't call me for a few days. Will call you when I can. Need to sort my life out." It was designed to sound like a young woman in turmoil, running away to clear her head. It was the perfect message to support the theory that she had disappeared voluntarily. But the cell site analysis proved it was a lie. That message was sent from the immediate vicinity of David Hodgson's house. The police were certain it was not Jenny who sent that text. It was her killer, using her phone to create a false trail, a final act of deception. After that text, Jenny's phone was never used again. But the digital story wasn't quite over. In the hours and days that followed, David Hodgson's phone was turned back on, and he began to make a series of what are known as silent calls to Jenny's phone. He would call her number, let it ring, and then hang up before the voicemail could connect. On the surface, it might look like a concerned friend trying to reach a missing person. But the investigators saw it for what it was, a cold, calculated act. He was checking to see if her phone had been found, if it had been turned back on. He was monitoring his own crime scene. The cell phone evidence was a stunningly detailed, second-by-second account of a murder. It showed the meeting, the final journey together, the separation of the phones, and the killer's journey with the victim's phone back to his own home, where he sent a fake goodbye message before presumably destroying it. It was a virtual confession, written in the invisible language of radio waves and cell towers. Armed with this powerful evidence, the police launched one of the largest and most extensive searches in the history of North Yorkshire. For months, hundreds of officers, specialist search teams, and volunteers scoured the vast, unforgiving landscape of the Yorkshire Dales. They searched woodlands, quarries, caves, and moorland. They used search dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging cameras, and ground-penetrating radar. They were looking for a body, for a shallow grave, for any sign of Jenny. The search was a grueling, heartbreaking effort. For Brian and Ann Nicholl, it was a living hell. Every day brought a fresh wave of agonizing hope and crushing disappointment. They made emotional, televised appeals, their faces a portrait of a parent's worst nightmare, begging for any information, begging for whoever had their daughter to just tell them where she was. David Hodgson, during this time, continued to play the part of the innocent man. He even had the audacity to participate in some of the local search efforts. A wolf in sheep's clothing, walking alongside the very people whose lives he had destroyed, pretending to look for the girl he had murdered. The police arrested and questioned Hodgson multiple times. They confronted him with the phone evidence. He denied everything. He created a web of lies, changing his story, offering flimsy alibis that were easily disproven. He claimed he had been with another woman that night, a story that the woman herself later refuted. He was arrogant, confident that without a body, the police could never prove their case. He was counting on that one fundamental piece of missing evidence to save him. But the North Yorkshire Police and the Crown Prosecution Service decided to take a bold and risky step. In 2007, 2 years after Jenny had vanished, they formally charged David Hodgson with her murder. They were going to trial without a body. The trial, held at Teesside Crown Court in early 2008, was a landmark case. The prosecution's argument rested almost entirely on the circumstantial and forensic evidence of the cell phone data. The prosecutor meticulously laid out the digital timeline for the jury, explaining how the cell site analysis created an irrefutable narrative of Jenny's final hours. He called it a story of technical evidence in human nature. He painted a portrait of David Hodgson as a manipulative, controlling predator who had been backed into a corner. When his teenage lover threatened to end their secret affair, he chose murder over exposure. He killed her to protect his own selfish, sordid life. The prosecution's case was bolstered by the testimony of Jenny's friends, who spoke of her turmoil and her decision to end the relationship. And her parents, Brian and Anne, took the stand. Their testimony a heartbreaking account of their loss, their quiet dignity filling the courtroom with a profound sense of the human cost of this crime. The defense's strategy was simple: to create reasonable doubt. They argued that with no body, there was no proof of murder. Jenny, they suggested, could still be alive. She could have run away, started a new life. They tried to portray her as a troubled, impulsive young woman. They attacked the cell phone evidence, calling it confusing and unreliable. But the digital trail was too strong, too specific. The timeline it created was too perfect a fit for the prosecution's theory. David Hodgson himself took the stand in his own defense, a risky move that ultimately backfired. He was a poor witness, coming across as arrogant, evasive, and deeply unsympathetic. His story was full of inconsistencies, and he was caught in several lies under cross-examination. His performance on the stand likely sealed his fate. After a 6-week trial, the jury retired to consider its verdict. For Brian and Ann Nicholl, the wait was torture. They were asking 12 strangers to declare their daughter dead, a final, horrifying confirmation of what they had known in their hearts for years. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. They found David Hodgson guilty of the murder of Jenny Nicholl. A wave of relief and raw emotion washed over the public gallery. Ann Nicholl wept, her husband holding her, their long, agonizing fight for justice finally over. The judge, sentencing Hodgson to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years, was scathing in his remarks. He called Hodgson a calculating and manipulative man who had preyed on a vulnerable young woman. He condemned him for the particular and enduring cruelty of refusing to reveal the location of Jenny's body, denying her family the basic human decency of a proper burial. David Hodgson was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of stone, showing no remorse, no emotion. He has maintained his innocence to this day, and he has never revealed what he did with Jenny's body. The case of Jenny Nicholl is a tragedy on multiple levels. It is the story of a young life full of promise, cut short by a selfish and predatory man. But it is also a story of a family's incredible resilience, and a testament to a police force and a prosecution team who refused to give up in the face of an almost insurmountable challenge. They proved that in the modern age, even when a killer manages to hide all physical traces of their crime, they can still be caught by the invisible whispers they leave behind in the digital world. For Brian and Ann Nicholl, the guilty verdict was not a victory. It was a confirmation of their worst fears. It did not bring their daughter back. It did not end their pain. And it did not give them the one thing they still desperately crave, the chance to bring Jenny home, to lay her to rest in the quiet, beautiful Yorkshire countryside she loved. Somewhere out on those vast, lonely moors, Jenny Nicholl's final secret remains, locked away in the heart of a merciless killer. Her parents continue to search, forever hoping that one day he will find a shred of humanity and end their agonizing wait. Until then, they are left only with their memories and the hollow justice of a conviction without a grave.